58b, 2 lines from the bottom. Taner Rabbanan. Tamid Kaidim LePesach. The afternoon sacrifice, the Tamid sacrifice, the daily sacrifice, was brought before the Korban Pesach. Pesach Kaidim LeKteris. And the Korban Pesach was brought before the Ketera service. The Keteris is the incense that was brought inside. Half of this amount was brought in the morning, half was brought in the afternoon. When in the afternoon? Well, it's always after the Tamid, but it was also brought after the Korban Pesach and Erev Pesach. Keteris Kedemis Laneris. Then there were the candles that were lit towards evening in the menorah. That was done even after the Keteris. So the Tamid, Pesach, Keteris, and Neris. That was the order. Now the Gemara explains why. Maybe it's the Bryce itself. The Bryce itself explains on top of Nantes. Yuchad davar shenemar by be'erev u'bein arbayim, l'davar shlei nemar by be'erev ela bein arbayim bilvad. We should make later what it says in the evening and in the afternoon to something that it only says in the afternoon. It doesn't say the evening. What is that? So by the Korban Pesach, it has two verses. One of them says Ba'erev, in the evening. Another verse says in the afternoon. And by the Korban Tamid, it only says in the afternoon. Now later on, we're going to have an expression of Babayker. It says twice in the morning. That means it needs to be earlier. That's going to be an expression later. Over here, I have two expressions of the afternoon. I have afternoon and evening. So the Mefarshim explain that it's not the double expression like it is later. Over here, it's the evening is a later time than the afternoon. Simple as that. By the Korban Tamid, it only says afternoon, and by the Korban Pesach, it says evening, and evening is later than the afternoon. So that's why the Korban Pesach is later than the Tamid. Okay, the Gemara asks, Ihachi. If that's the case, then Keteris v'Neris nami nikdemu lePesach. Let the Keteris and the incense and the candles, the burning of in the menorah, the lighting of the kindling of the lights in the menorah, that should also come before the Korban Pesach. And it explains why. Yucha davar shnemar by be'erev u'bein arbayim, davar shlei nemar by ela bein arbayim bilvad. It only says bein harbayim by the candles and the Keteris. And the Pesach says Be'erev, and you just told me that Be'erev is later, so it should be later. That's the Gemara's question. Shani Hasem Demiat Rachman Oisai. The Gemara answers that over there it says Oisai. It says it, and which tells me that it needs to be later. Nothing else is later than the candles. So really, the candles say afternoon, so it should be before the evening, before the Korban Pesach. But I have another verse that says Isai, which tells me that it's later. The Tanya, this was taught in a Bryce. It says Me'erev ad Baiker, from evening to morning. That's when the candles would burn. They burn the whole night. The oil lamps in the menorah. What does that mean? Ten lamidasa. You should put in it the measurement shetei delekas me'erev ad Baiker, which is a lug for each holder, each lamp of the 7 lamps. Each one of them should have a lug in it, and the reason for the lug is because in the longest nights of the year, which is in the winter, you don't need more than a lug. A lug would be able to burn the whole night. It depends on the size of the wick, but whatever was the average wick, that would be a lug would cover that. So that means that you have to put in enough oil that it will last the whole night. Davar acher, another pshat, but it says me'erev ad Baiker. Ein lecha avodah sheksher me'erev ad Baiker ela zu bilvad. This is the only service that's kosher from evening to morning. My time, well, what's the reason? Amar kra yarech isa Yaron Avanav. That Aaron and his sons set this up. They should arrange the lamps. Me'erev ad Baiker. From evening to morning. Isai me'erev ad Baiker. Vein davar acher me'erev ad Baiker. That means that nothing else could come after these lamps are lit. That's the Isai. Oisai me'erev ad Baiker, that means that the candles need to be last. I can't do the Korban Pesach after it. Problem is, why did we say before that by the candles it only says Bein Arbayim? Here you see it says me'erev. It says from the evening. I'm not sure. We said before. I know it says Bein Arbayim by the candles, but it seems to say Be'erev also. But me'erev ad Baiker. Maybe it's not Ba'erev. Maybe it's me'erev. I'm not sure. Okay. V'iskish k'teris l'neris. And there's a comparison from the k'teris to the candles, that just like nothing can come after the candles, because the candles are me'erev ad Baiker, only Isai, that's the latest service of the day. So to the Ketores, that's the latest service of the day. Now they can't both be, but so then the candles are the last, and then comes the Ketores, and then before that is the Korban Pesach, and before that is the Tamid. But Tanya Kikushin, however, there is another brisa that actually says it the way that we suggested as a question. Tamid kaidem lek'teres. You hear? The Tamid comes before the Ketores. Ketores kedemis l'neiris. The Ketores comes before the candles, the lamps, and v'neiris kedemis l'pesach, and the lamps come before the Korban Pesach. This is exactly what our suggestion is, and then we had to bring psukim to say that you don't do this. There's a brisa that actually says this. Yucha davar shnemar by be'erev u'bein arbayim l'davar shleinemar by ela bein arbayim belvad. Let the latest thing that says be'erev, that should be later than the things that say only bein arbayim. Yeah, something strange with this be'erev. Taisvus question. I just see Taisvus asked it. Taisvus in Ketores v'neiris nikdim el Pesach. Hiksher rivav v'neiris not eksiv nami may erev ad Baiker. Yeah, Taisvus says that may erev ad Baiker, that it says by the candles, is telling me the amount of oil, not the time when to do it, as we just said in the Gemara. That explains. There's also an emphasis that it's May Erev Ad Baiker. The burning is from evening to morning, is the amount of oil that needs to be in there. It's not telling me actually that I have to burn it in the evening at a later time. Okay. So now,
Rabbi Smith, quick question. Yeah. There's a ton of Rabbanan. So these are Tanoim who are having this discussion. Is that correct? Is it not necessarily so?
No, it's clearly, the original statements are clearly Brice's. And the question is, what's going on afterwards? The Ihachi, Ketores, and that's probably the Gemara discussing the Brice.
I'm trying to place this discussion in time. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. It's weird. I'm hearing you through the.
Thank you.
To the computer, not to the. I don't think these are on actually. Somehow they fixed it. I don't think it's where I'm talking through it. Okay. So let's see what happens. Hear me now? Still working? Yeah? Okay. Bryce that has this that does it differently. No, it doesn't. Okay, so I have to have it in. Yeah. Okay. Now you hear me better? Back to normal? Okay. So we had the brisa that does it with the order that first goes to. It's not perfect? Yitzi? It's fine. The brisa says, oh, it's not, I should adjust something. Wait a second. Yeah, that's good. Yes, can you hear me now?
We need the clearest transmission possible.
Okay, so the second brisa says that first you do the carbon tamid, then you do the ketores, then the candles, and then the carbon pesach. The Gemara asks, 1 second. Vaksiv Isai. But you said the word Isai, that the latest thing of the day, nothing could be later than that, is referring to the that says Isai by the candles. And here you're telling me that you do the carbon pesach later. The Gemara says, Hi Isai mi baile lemuti avidu shebefnim. That is, yes, it's excluding that nothing can come later. But which nothing can come later? Which can't come later? What can't come later is only things that are done inside the heichal, not things that are done in the courtyard. Anything in the heichal, in the inner Beis Hamikdash, that inner chamber, that can't be later. But something that's done in the courtyard, which is the carbon pesach, that could be later. I say that's the last thing that's done inside. Okay. My Neil, what is it excluding? What else could I have done inside the heichal that can't come later? It says ketores. The ketores can't come later than the candles. Could have thought that because the pasuk says that when Aaron kindles the lights in the afternoon, that's when you should burn the ketores. Maybe that's the way you do it. Aaron lights the candles and then you burn the ketores. So Miyat Rachmana Isai, the pasuk says no. What it means is that when Aaron lights the candles, the ketores is burning. Isai, nothing comes later than the candles. The candles is done last. So what was the comparison that you did between the candles, the candles and the ketores? It says Hachikama. Hachikama Rachmana. This is what the Eberster is saying. At the time that you light the candles, the ketores should be burning already. Okay. The whole discussion here is where the carbon pesach comes in. Is the carbon pesach done after that, or is the carbon pesach done before that? And the Tanur Rabbanan was before, but there was a brisa that says that it's later. Tanur Rabbanan, we're in the middle of Nuntes, in the middle of 59a. Taught in the brisa. The Tanur Rabbanan is an important brisa. It's Reb Shira Gaon tells us that the Tanur Rabbanans are the ones that were edited by Reb Chi and Rabbi Shia. That's the important brisa. Yeah. They usually don't start with a name either. They usually start off anonymous. Tanur Rabbanan was taught in the brisa. Nothing is done before the morning tamid, except for ketores. Shenemar ba'boker. We say by the ketores, we say ba'boker in the morning. That means the morning of the morning, the 5:30 a.m. This is done before the morning. So that's the ketores. The carbon tamid is done in the morning. The ketores is done ba'boker. The yuktim ketores davar shenemar by ba'boker. We the ketores which says ba'boker comes first. It precedes the ksiv viktor lavang ketores samid ba'boker. Davar shleinemar by ba'boker echad. Ba'boker comes before one ba'boker. One ba'boker. Bein lecha davar shemasake v'acher tamid shel bein arba'im el ketores finish for Pesach and chusuk kippurim ber Pesach. Shetei b'shenis v'yichlas peschilar. Okay, we said in the morning the carbon tamid comes first, with the exception of ketores, which is before that. In the afternoon, the latest thing that's done is the carbon tamid, with the exception of a bunch of exceptions. The ketores, that's done afterwards. The candles is afterwards. The carbon pesach is afterwards. And then we throw in one more item, and that is someone that was tamei, for example, a zav or a yeledes, a woman that gave birth, or a zava, that need to become pure, and they need to bring a sacrifice afterwards in order to be able to eat sacrificial meat. That's part of their purification. So, if one of these people did not bring their sacrifice yet in its Erev Pesach, they need to eat that evening the Korban Pesach. Now, they have one limitation. That is that they didn't bring their sacrifice at the end of their purification process, which would allow them to eat the Korban Pesach that night. So, because they need to eat the Korban Pesach, they're also allowed to bring that last sacrifice that will allow them to eat the Korban Pesach that night. So we say it's called Mechusar Kippurim, someone that's lacking his atonement. It means the end of his purification process. He already went to the mikvah. Really, he only needs to wait for nightfall. But that's only for Truma. When it comes to eating sacrificial meat, he also needs the sacrifice. So the Kayanim, when do they? Well, they eat it that evening. I don't know. So what happens after he brings his last sacrifice? He goes to the mikveh again. Shetovel shenis. He goes to the mikveh again, and then he can eat his korban pesach. Yeah, usually it doesn't say that he goes to the mikveh again, but there's clearly that it says that he does. I mean, usually it says there's something called the tfil yaim. He goes to the mikveh, then he waits for evening. The following day, he would bring the kapara. Until then, it's called the machusar kippurim. Brings the kapara, and then he can eat. And here it adds in that detail, and then he goes to the mikveh again, and then he can eat his sacrifice. So we have a chiddush here that the machusar kippurim can bring a sacrifice even after the korban tamid to allow him to eat the korban pesach. Rabbi Shmuel ben Eishel Rabbi Yechim ben Breka Omer af mechusar kippurim b'shayim ma'aseh shana shetayvel b'eichel kachim la'erev. Rabbi Shmuel ben Eishel Rabbi Yechim ben Breka has an even bigger thing. Says, let's say there was a person that was tamei, and they didn't bring their sacrifice yet of the atonement to be able to that sacrifice that finishes the purification. However, they brought a shlamim. Now it's fine. They brought a shlamim. The only thing is they can't eat it because they didn't have the kapara sacrifice. So the mitzvah of eating the sacrifice that they brought allows them to bring their kapara sacrifice after the tamid to be able to eat the shlamim that they had brought earlier in the day in the proper time before the tamid. Right? All sacrifices are brought in between the two tamid, the tamid in the morning and tamid in the afternoon. In between that, they brought their shlamim. What happened is he didn't bring a sacrifice yet to eat the shlamim. So Rabbi Shmuel ben Eishel Rabbi Yechim ben Breka says you can bring the sacrifice after the afternoon tamid as well, to be able to eat the shlamim later on. The Gemara says, Bishlam the Tanna Kama didn't mention this exception. And we understand why. Because Yavaya say the Pesach, Shesh Bekaris, Vitcha say the Ashlam Shem Bekaris. The Korban Pesach is very strict. Someone that neglects the Korban Pesach has karis. One of the only things that there's positive commands that have karis. Very strict law. So the law of neglecting the Korban Pesach is going to override the law that you don't bring anything after the korban tamid, and therefore you're going to bring your kapara, and then you'll be able to eat the korban pesach. We understand that. But El Rabbi Shmuel ben Eishel Rabbi Yechim ben Breka, one second. I have two positive commands. One command is eat the korban that you brought. Everyone needs to eat. If it's a shlamim, it needs to be put on the mizbeach. The kainim need to eat it, and the owner needs to eat it. That's one positive command. I have another positive command. And it says that the last sacrifice of the day is the korban tamid. That's a positive command. Allah hashlim kol hakorbanos kulam, right? That you on it is the last. That's the completion of the sacrifices of the day. So I have two positive commands. Why is one stronger than the other? Why should I bring a sacrifice later in order to be able to fulfill an earlier command? Why should I do that? Why is one stronger than the other? Amar Rabina, Amar Rav Chisda, Hachad b'chatas ha'oif. we give it's called an akimta. We give a scenario where you're not violating the law of putting something on the mizbeach after the karban tamid. Why? Because we're dealing with the chatas ha'oif. The chatas ha'oif is totally eaten, its blood is sprinkled, and nothing is burned on the altar. So we came up with a scenario where you'll be able to bring your kapara, and it doesn't have to go on the mizbeach either. So okay, that's the pshat in Rabbi Shmuel ben Ishar talking about a mitzayra, that one of the sacrifices that he brings is a chatas. If the mitzayra is poor, instead of bringing a chatas, the sin offering as an animal, he brings it as a bird. If it's a bird, nothing goes on the mizbeach besides for the blood. They throw it. The inside, it's thrown somewhere, and the rest is eaten by the kohen. Rav Papa says, "Afilu tema b'chatas behema." It even could be an animal. What you do is, you don't actually offer it on the mizbeach. You walk it up the mizbeach, and then you just leave it over there. But you don't put it on the fire. Now there's a problem. No, the animal shechted. You carry it up. Not to walk up with by a leash. You carry it up the mizbeach, and you put it up there, and you just leave it there. And then it doesn't become pasul. So because the blood was sprinkled, you're already allowed to eat the shlamim, because it's as if the sacrifice was brought, but you didn't put the limbs on the fire, which you're supposed to do. So okay, that you can do afterwards. It's not going to become pasul. Why doesn't it become pasul? Usually anything that's left overnight becomes pasul. No, it doesn't become pasul because it was on the top of the mizbeach. It's a special over there. It's like a home base. Yeah.
Are they arguing with Yochanan ben Baroka?
No, they're explaining Rabbi Shmuel ben Ishar. They're saying
he's dispositive, right? They're just explaining.
What does that mean? He's dispositive. What does that mean?
I mean, he settles the argument.
Oh, so everyone else said.
And I say that because he conceivably lived while the Beis Hamikdash was functioning. We have people 8 generations later talking about him. And that's why I've had trouble placing these arguments. And
is it clear that
we've had trouble placing these arguments?
Thank you.
Is it clear that he's in the time of the Beis Hamikdash?
No, it's not clear, but he's pretty close to it. In other words,
he's definitely closer than Rav Papa.
The same getter as Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Eliezer.
Oh, he's on the same line, on the same time.
He's between them and Rabbi Akiva.
So he was there by the Beis Hamikdash.
He was there, yeah.
Rabbi Shua was in the Beis Hamikdash. He was a Levi.
So, as I said, his statement is final on the subject. They're just trying to understand it.
Not necessarily.
We are trying to understand it, Itzi.
Not necessarily. There's 2 opinions here. There's the Tanna Kama that says that the exception of bringing a sacrifice after the Tamid Shel Bein Arbayim, after the afternoon Tamid, is only a Karban Pesach, and someone that's not able to eat his Karban Pesach is allowed to bring the other sacrifice that will allow him to eat the Karban Pesach. Rabbi Shmuel ben Ishar says not only for the Karban Pesach is there an exception, but for anyone that has a sacrifice that they can't eat until they bring their kapara, they can also bring their kapara after the Karban Tamid. So he's extending this exception to any sacrifice that needs to be eaten. We're saying, why is that? The Karban Pesach we understood, but why any sacrifice? There's 2 commands that have equal status. So we came up with the ukimtas solutions of how you're not violating the law of the positive command of completing all sacrifices with the afternoon sacrifice. First example was where you didn't burn anything on the mizbeach because it was a chatas ha'oif. It was just a bird that was brought by a mitzayra that's poor. Then now we're saying that you're not actually burning something on the mizbeach because you're just bringing it up and you're leaving it there, and this is going to allow him to be able to eat his sacrifice. The Gemara says, 1 second. What about the other sacrifices? It's going back on the answer that it was a bird that's not burned. What about the other sacrifices? By a Mitzvah, he has to bring a chatas and an oila and an asham. So the chatas and the oila could be brought as birds. You can get away with it. The asham cannot be brought as a bird. The asham needs to be, even if he's poor, it needs to be an asham. It needs to be that third sacrifice needs to be an animal. If you want to tell me that it's eaten without being burned, so that's not going to work by the asham. So what's your answer? You have the other sacrifice. You can't eat you can't eat the shlamim that you brought earlier in the day that you're trying to resolve. How am I supposed to eat it? And the afternoon tamid was already brought, so you have to bring in this other set. But you can't bring the sacrifice. If you learn like Rav Papa that he said that you just bring it up on top of the altar and you leave it there. I know the malinla. That's what it means. You bring it up. Rav Chizda that said that we're dealing with a bird that's not burnt at all. How do you answer with the asham that can't be brought as a bird? Amri, the answer is Shekarav Ashamai. They got very busy. They brought the asham before the afternoon tamid. The only thing that was left was the chatas oif, and that they did later. You're right, the asham would have been a problem, but we're talking about where you brought the asham before. Where it says, well, okay, you answered that. Ve'ika oila. What about the oila? Now the oila is burnt on the altar. The oila bird. It's a bird, but it's burnt on. Maybe the oila doesn't. The oila is like a gift offering that's brought afterwards. Maybe the main sacrifice that allows you to eat is the asham and the chatas, and not the oila. The oila is brought, but you can still eat before the oila. Maybe you can eat the other sacrifice, even though he's impure and he needed these sacrifices. But the oila isn't marked. Maybe that's the pshat. But we have a brayser, Rabbi Shmuel ben Yishua, Rabbi Yechim, Rabbi Yechim, Kshem shachatasi v'ashami mak ben kachi lase mak lase. It's not true. The oila is also ma'akev. V'chitema b'shekar v'ilase. We have a simple answer. How did he answer by the asham? He said you brought it already during the day. So maybe you brought the oila also during the day. And the only thing that you had left was the chatas, which is no problem. It's a good answer. It says, but if you didn't bring the chatas, then you're not allowed to bring the oila. The oila always comes after the chatas. The chatas is like an apology letter. It's a sin offering. The oila is a gift that comes after the apology letter. You don't really send the gift and then the first the apology and then the gift. So you can't bring the chatas during the day and the oila later. That's the order. It has to be done in order. What is the pasuk saying that you bring the chatas first? If it's coming to tell you that you bring the chatas before an oila, we have another pasuk that says that the second offering was an oila. Rather, it's coming to teach us to all other parts of the Torah. That the rule is that you always bring the chatas first and then the oila. That's what we learned. Okay, so the kaimalan, and we have a rule that even a chatas ha'oif has to come before an oilas behema. If that's the case, then how are we saying that he's going to be allowed to bring a sacrifice after the afternoon tamid? We have a rule that nothing comes after the afternoon tamid. What's the pshat in Rabbi Shmuel ben Yishua, Rabbi Yechim, Rabbi Yechim? If you say that it's not burnt on the altar, then great. If you say that it's only brought up but it's not burnt on the altar, then great. But according to the answer that says that it's not burnt at all because it's a chatas, what about the other sacrifice of the oila? The asham could have been brought earlier, but the oila has to be brought after the chatas. Couldn't have been brought earlier. It's a problem. Amarava says shani oilas mitzayra. The oila that a mitzayra brings, which that's what we're dealing with here. The Rachmana Amar, the Eibishter says v'hela kain esa oila shehela kvar. Over here, the oila could come first. We learn from a pasuk that says that the kain brings up the oila, but the tense is that the hela kain asa oila. The kain brought up what was brought up meant that it was brought up already. That's how it's being learned. That means that the oil could have been brought by day, and we're only dealing with the chafas oif, according to Rav Chisda, and that's where we're holding. Amar Rav Shaman bar Abba l'Rav Papa. Rav Shaman bar Abba says to Rav Papa, "L'didoch the Amrit, Ma'ila Melina Breish Sham Mizbeach." According to you, you gave a teretz for Rabbi Shmuel ben Ish or Rabbi Yechim ben Breka that you take the sacrifice, you slaughter it, you bring it up, you bring it up onto the altar, but you don't burn it yet. You don't burn it yet, and you just let it sit there overnight, and then tomorrow, after the carbon tamid shel shacha, you'll burn it, and it doesn't become possible. The problem is that all night there's kayanim that are there burning fats of sacrifices that were offered during the day but weren't fully burnt, and they have to get put back into the fire to be able to be burnt. Now they're going to see this meat up there that was supposed to be burnt properly, but it wasn't burnt at all. That sacrifice wasn't really offered, and they're going to burn it that night, and that's not allowed. You're allowed to burn the fats at night, but not the limbs, not the parts that are supposed to be burnt on the altar. Just the rest of it that wasn't finished being burnt is allowed to go at night, and this was never offered yet. You have to wait for the carbon tamid to offer this. So the didach, according to you, that say you bring it and leave it on the mizbeach, kaimin va'avdinan milsa lakayanim dasavol de takala. The kayanim are going to stumble. They're going to sabri the yaimahu vasalakturi. They're just going to throw it onto the fire. They're not going to know that this one doesn't have a label on it that says this one's for tomorrow. Amrilei kayanim zrizim heim. He responded, kayanim are zrizim. What does zrizim mean? They have walkie-talkies, and they say, don't offer that one. They inform each other. There's reason about being informative. That's what it means. There's reason means that they're swift. They work quickly. They work quickly in informing each other what the sacrifice. Efficient. Well, efficient means like they save time, save money. Okay. Amalei Ravashi l'Rav Kana. Ravashi says to Rav Kana. Rami l'Rav Huna Breder Rav Nasim l'Rav Papa. Some say it's Rav Huna Breder Rav Nasim says to Rav Papa. They're asking on Rav Papa. So it's either Ravashi is asking Rav Kana, which is after Rav Papa, or they're asking Rav Papa directly. V'kamad le'miskache murim kainim le'matziach lebasar. There's a problem here. There's a problem with Rav Papa's answer. Rav Papa is saying that the blood of the sacrifice is sprinkled, and therefore the fellow that was tamei can now eat the sacrifice that he brought during the day, the shlamim, because his sacrifice was brought. Now, his sacrifice wasn't really brought. It was only the blood was sprinkled. The rest of the sacrifice was up on the altar, but the limbs were not burnt on the altar. If the limbs aren't burnt on the altar, then the kohanim did not eat their part. If the kohanim did not eat their part, then it's not considered that it was offered yet. That's the question here. So there's a limitation on the kohanim eating until the limbs are burnt. And if the kohanim didn't eat, then they can't. Then it's not considered that it was offered. The Tanya was taught in the Brisa. It could be possible to think that the kohanim could eat the chest and the thigh, which that's the part that goes to the kohanim, before the limbs are offered. First, the fats need to be brought on the altar, and then the kohanim can eat their part. The kohanim layachli basar bailon lemiskapri, and until the kohanim eat, the owners aren't atoned. The kohanim didn't eat because it wasn't offered, it wasn't burnt, then the owners aren't atoned either. The Tanya v'achlo eisam asher kupar behem malamisha kohanim eichlem bailon miskaprim. We learn from a pasuk that the eating of the kohanim is an atonement for the owners, for the one that brought the sacrifice. Here where the kohanim aren't eating it because the mizbeach didn't consume it, and so the owners aren't atoned. So what type of teretz is this? Amalei, he says, Kivan d'layefsha some commissionit moisha abdu. What would happen if the part that's supposed to go on the fire after the blood was sprinkled, it gets lost, it becomes tamei? So then the Mizbeach doesn't get it, but the Kainim are still allowed to eat if it gets lost in that situation. So he says what we're doing over here is the fact that we can't bring it on the altar, we can't burn it on the altar because the afternoon tamid was already offered. So it says if it became tamei, or if it got lost, the Kainim are allowed to eat because that's what would happen if it disappeared or something. The Kainim would. And so therefore, the owners are atoned. The Tanya, started in the Brisa. Let's say the limbs or the fats, get tamei or lost. Maybe the Kainim can't eat their chest and thigh. That's part of the animal that they get. They get it nevertheless. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with. Rav Papa resolves the issue. And he says that because of this is a difficult scenario where you can't actually put it on the fire, the Kainim are still allowed to eat, which means that the owner is atoned, which means that he can now eat his shlamim that he brought earlier in the day. Even though none of this should have been done because the Korban Tamid was the afternoon Tamid was brought already. Okay, Rav Kana Rami. Rav Kana posed the contradiction. One pasuk says, "La yalen chelav kagi ad baiker." The fat of the sacrifice should not stay over until the morning. Ad baiker hu de la yalen. Until the morning it shouldn't stay over. Hakol alayla kula yalen. But it's allowed to stay. It's allowed to be there the whole night. Now, this sounds like I'm allowed to bring things up on the altar by night. It's only not allowed to stay until morning. But the entire night, I can. It sounds like I can bring things up. Now, there's a problem with this pasuk because that from the afternoon tamid you weren't allowed to bring anything up. Then you say that you can do it the whole night. The whole problem is just if it reached morning. So who ma'asav la v'hu mefarik. Rav Kana asked the question. He also answers it. And he says, talking about when are you allowed to bring things up the whole night? That's only if the blood was sprinkled already and this was left over because for whatever reason it didn't get burned. Then you're allowed to finish bringing it the whole night. Once it was started to be offered and it's left over, that you're allowed to continue the whole night. But lechatchila, to go bring it up afterwards, that you're not allowed to do. Rami le Rav Safra le Rav. Rav Safra asks Rav. On the side it says it's to Rava. Yeah, they're trying to prove on the side that it's Rava. Okay. Ksiv, one pasuk says, La yalin la boike zeva chag Pesach. You should not stay over till the morning, the sacrifice of the Korban Pesach. La boike hud la yalin hakal alay la yalin. It could stay the whole night, just not until the morning. V'haksiv, but I have another problem. I have a pasuk that says, Oylas Shabbos b'Shabbat v'le'olas chol b'Shabbos v'le'olas chol b'Yom Tov. Listen to this question. The Korban Pesach is brought on the 14th of Nisan. The 14th of Nisan is Erev Pesach. It's eaten on the 15th of Nisan. The 15th of Nisan is Pesach. It's a Yom Tov. It says the meat should not stay over. That means that the whole night I'm allowed to burn it. I have it. I'm also allowed to burn it. I'm also allowed to put it on. But the parts that go on the altar, I'm allowed to put on the altar. I have a problem. The problem is that how can you burn a weekday sacrifice on Yom Tov? Weekday sacrifices are not allowed to be offered on Yom Tov. This is considered a weekday sacrifice because it was slaughtered on the 14th. So Amar Lei, Rava or Rav, whoever it is, says back, that's why it has to be Rava. Rav would have been before Rabavo. Yeah, that's the chat. Rabavo was a student of Rabbi Yechon, a later student of Rabbi Yechon, and Rav is probably older than Rabbi Yechon. Yeah. So it's Rava. So Rav Safra was asking Rava. He says, "Oh, this was already asked by Rab Abba Barchia to Rab Avo." Vishanilei, and he answered the following answer. He says, "Hachabar ba'asar shcholius b'Shabbos askinan dechal v'Shabbos kreven b'yamtiv." A very interesting answer. Also, it's a ukimta. It's a daichik. It's saying that whole pasuk is just talking about a single scenario. What's the scenario? That Yud Daled Nisan that year was on Shabbos. That night is Yom Tiv, Yaknaz, and right, you make Abdullah and the kid, in the kid. Yeah, Abdullah's mitzvah Shabbos. The Erev Pesach was Shabbos. No, Erev Pesach was Shabbos. That night is Yom Tiv. That means the sacrifice was brought on Shabbos. It's usually a weekday. Now it happens to because the calendar fell out on Shabbos. And now what we're doing is, with that pasuk that says that you're allowed to continue to burn the sacrifice the whole night, the Korban Pesach, the parts that go on the altar, that's because we have a rule that Shabbos sacrifices are, yes, allowed to be burnt on Yom Tov. It's only weekday sacrifices that aren't, and this was brought on Shabbos. Yeah. But the pasuk seems to say that you're allowed to bring it up as well. The problem is that in a regular case, it would be forbidden because it's Yom Tov. Amar Lei responds to him, I guess. Rabbi Vo said to, it doesn't tell me who's the Amar Lei. It's either Rabbi Vo said to Rabbi Abba Barchia, or it's Rab Safra telling Rava. Doesn't say there was a conversation in a conversation. It doesn't say where we're getting back to. He says, Mishum dechel ve'Shabbos kreven b'Yom Tov, because there's such an example that fats, the parts of the animal that come from a Shabbos sacrifice are allowed to be brought on Yom Tov. And on Neko v'Neimele the high krab arbafster shecholius Shabbos v'diksiv. You're going to tell me that that's what the pasuk is talking about? I know you found the halacha that it works, but now you're going to restrict, you're going to limit the pasuk to being in one scenario, which happens once every, 19 years or something. I don't know. That's what the pasuk is talking about. Amalei, shafke lekra. Don't worry about that. Leave that pasuk alone. The pasuk has an inherent problem. It's not us that we're answering. The pasuk needs to be translated like this because of the contradiction that there is in the psukim. So it's not like we're coming in and we're doing something here. The pasuk itself has an issue, and the pasuk gets resolved by saying that this is the case. Okay.